Hey, thanks for clicking on this video. Just a pre-warning, I think there's like some gore and magic and stuff, but if you're okay with that stuff and you like it, then please enjoy. Horror in the West, Part 3. Written by Levi, read by John Anthony. Xavier drove towards his house, Anne sitting shotgun. Xavier looked behind him and thought he could hear the demented screams and laughs of the poltergeist that dwelled in the maze of horrors sitting innocently on the hillside. Tears streaming from her cheeks, Anne shivered next to him, fear in her eyes. When they reached Xavier's house, he and Anne ran straight to his parents' room. "Mom! Dad! Wake up! We were just at the old haunted house, and the ghost killed Rachel and Logan!" Xavier screamed as they barged into the room. Xavier's parents scrambled out of the sheets, groggy and disoriented. "Go back to bed, Xavier. It was just a bad dream," his dad mumbled. "No, it wasn't. We were just there. Anne saw it too." "Anne?" Xavier's mom asked, shaking her head. "Anne, what are you doing here?"
"That doesn't matter right now, Mrs. Shadow. We were just at the haunted house on the hill, and Logan and Rachel were murdered by the ghost. He said he was Harvey Jones, and he had finally found his nemesis. He killed Logan with a floating saber, and he killed Rachel by shooting her in his shoulder, making her fall into a hole. You need to call the police or FBI immediately."
A dark shadow passed briefly over Xavier's dad's face, but it was so quick Xavier thought he imagined it. "You two have been smoking something you're not supposed to, haven't you?" his dad said. "Xavier, I told you Anne was a bad influence on you. Now you go straight to bed. If I hear one more word about this, you're going to be locked in a room for a week with only bread and water. You hear? But not another word. Anne, you go straight home, and you won't want to tell anyone else about this incident. Now, would you? I have a gun, by the way." Anne paled and swallowed.
"Of course not, Mr. Shadow."
"Good. Now get out of here and go back to your bed." Xavier watched as Anne scampered out of the room. "Xavier, go back to your room. You're not coming out for a long, long time." Xavier lay in his room, shaking. He tried to forget what happened that night, tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't. His brain kept replaying over and over and over the gruesome scene of the deaths of his two best friends. He remembered the research project, how they snuck up to the big hill, slipped inside the window, how they found the painting of a man and spray-painted it. Such a mistake. Such a terrible, terrible mistake. He remembered how the Civil War saver stabbed through the wall and ran through Logan before he could react. His friend getting his back skewered like a kebab, blood spilling everywhere, on the floor, on himself. He remembered Logan's body, slumped, split into two halves through his skull, lying in a puddle. No, a lake of blood. He remembered how they had to run. There was a pit ahead of them. They rounded the corner, but they saw an old flintlock pistol that had floated off the display and fired a shot into Rachel's shoulder that caused her to trip on her heel and sent her tumbling down 4 stories into a pit of sharp, unwavering metal spikes. Xavier remembered the form of her broken body impaled on the spikes, her intestines snagged on some of them. He remembered running back where he tripped and smashed into the wall, dislodging from behind a display a journal and a pocket watch. He grabbed both and ran for his life. The house was a maze of fear, so many death traps. Xavier and Anne had almost died, but by some strange luck, fate had kept them both unscathed, thus causing their parents' disbelief. Tossing and turning in his bed, Xavier at last slipped into a fitful, uneasy sleep. Xavier opened his eyes. He sat up and rubbed them, stretched, and got out of bed. He went to open the door, but it was locked. My dad must have locked it last night after... The events of the night before crashed into him like a tidal wave, and he staggered back, overwhelmed in a wave of vertigo. The loss of his two best friends finally sinking in, he gasped, shivered, and fell on his knees, folding backwards. He felt like an elephant of grief, despair, and depression was sitting on his chest. He managed to choke out a sob, then a wail, a long, tortured, demented scream that leaked out of his mouth from somewhere deep inside his soul. Then it felt as if all the stops were pulled out, and he started sobbing. Not bothering to keep down the noise this time, he poured out all his sadness, the weight of the loss like a never-ending pile of fuel, giving him the energy to keep living 1 second at a time. He might have cried for 10 hours or 10 minutes. There was no way of knowing. When he came to the end, he suddenly stopped and stared at the ceiling in silence, with tears marks standing out on his cheeks like a rash. My best friend's died, he said to himself. There's nothing we can do about it, except... He thought for a minute. Suddenly, resolve hardened his features. He got up and took a phone out of his pocket. He speed dialed Anne and waited with the tone features until she answered.
Yes?
She said in a shaky voice. It sounded like she had just been crying. Hey, Anne. Xavier softened his voice a little bit. I know it's terrible that Logan and Rachel died, and we have to accept that fact, but we won't move on until we settle this.
What are we going to do? What's your plan?
Anne asked firmly. Xavier spoke, and when he did, his voice was sharp and rigid with anger. We're going to go back to that house and teach the ghost a lesson. Xavier was sitting on his bed with a scowl on his face when he heard the doorknob rattling. It made a sound like a key turning, and then the handle turned, and the door opened. In walked Xavier's dad. He sat down at the edge of the bed and said, Son, what you did was wrong. I'm very disappointed in you. I thought I taught you better. I have communicated to you that drugs are bad, and you should never be within 10 feet of them. Why did you run off like that in the middle of the night and let that girl persuade you to directly disregard my instructions? I thought you were better than this. I promise to you, I did not take drugs, Xavier stated calmly. I told you the truth last night. I thought you knew me better than to immediately think I was lying or crazy. Haven't you considered that I was actually telling the truth? His dad hesitated for a second. You, young man, were not given permission to speak. You are going to go to school. When you come back, you're going to stay in your room until tomorrow. I'll bring you dinner. Now go. Xavier met Anne at his locker when he arrived at school. She was tense and pale, waiting for him. What did your dad say? She asked. He said nothing in particular. I couldn't convince him that I was telling the truth, though. What are you going to do? I'm going to read that journal and see what I find. Harvey Jones didn't seem too happy with me finding it. I want to tell someone about this really bad, Anne said. Do you think your dad will actually follow through with the threat? I'm absolutely sure he will. He hates you with a passion now. The next time he sees you, he'll blow your brains out. We have to prove to him the ghost is real. We need to start gathering proof right away. Annie, stop right there. Xavier's dad towered above everyone in the hallway. Everyone stopped and stared. Xavier froze. His dad? Here at school? He must have been followed to make sure he wouldn't get in trouble. His dad started making his way over, face red with anger, hands on the gun in his pocket. I have a good idea, Xavier said. Run! They sprinted down the hall in the opposite direction, glancing over their shoulders fearfully. Xavier's dad, furious, roared and started shoving kids out of the way in an effort to reach them. Following the nearest exit signs, they burst out of the school. They ran into the town as fast as they could and stopped in an alley between the barber shop and a restaurant. Panting for breath, Anne asked, Where do we go now? To be continued. Hey, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends about it. But as always, remember, keep those titanium skulls polished, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later. Bye-bye.